Welcome to The Shutter. I've got two awesome viewer submissions for you. I think some people get caught up in the creepypasta tales that are fantastic stories, but they're just so far out there sometimes that it's hard to really track with them. I only want to tell purported accounts on here. Not saying that I won't tell a creepypasta one day, I might do it, but you're going to know the difference. I think people forget just how much a simple happening can affect someone. This first story is from Scott. It's simple, but it's also very powerful. So I hope you enjoy. My name is Scott. I'm 53 and I live near Richmond, Virginia. Back in 2000, I worked at the main office of a medical firm. I'm an artist and I was responsible for creating interactive learning presentations to train our medical staff. I worked there for 18 years. When I first started, I used to help file claims to insurance companies for our patients. One evening, in the fall of my first year, I stayed a little later than normal to catch up on some filing. I was completely alone in the billing section of our office. I was working in a corner cubicle in a row of cubicles that happened to be at the end of the main hallway through this part of the building. It really wasn't that late, maybe around 7 p.m., when suddenly I heard what was obviously someone running from down the other end of the hallway towards my end of the hallway. The running sound was very clear and quickly growing louder, pounding down the aisle in full sprint. As it neared, the sound abruptly stopped right behind me. I'd only been working for a few months, but had made several new friends and was sure it was one of my buddies from the HR department just messing around after work. Not wanting to show fear or even act surprised, I waited a second before turning around to face him. I turned around, and there was no one there. I smiled and called out my friend's name, "Greg." No one answered. I stood up and looked in the cubicle next to me and around the corner where the bathrooms were. Still no one. I actually looked in the men's room and stood very still, quietly waiting for Greg to jump out, but no one did. I went back to my filing, convinced he must have slipped out of the building before I turned around to see him. Greg was a great guy with a really interesting background. He was an ex-state trooper, vegetarian, and taught yoga classes on the weekends. If there was anyone who could sneak past me, it would certainly have been him. He also did comedy improv and had a mischievous sense of humor, so if there was anyone who would do something goofy like run down a hallway and abruptly stop and hide, it also would have been this guy. I finished up my work and went home. The next morning I came in the normal time and the office was already growing busy with work. I was printing out some paperwork and said good morning to a couple of female colleagues. One of them asked how things were going with the claim filing. I said everything's great and I got all the claims filed, though someone came down the hallway running full speed and stopped right behind me, but when I turned around, there wasn't anyone there. "Do you think it could have been Greg? Is he in yet?" Both of them stopped smiling and their eyes grew big at the same time. One of the ladies blurted out, "Shut your face, no way, you're joking, right?" That's what Serena said happened to her before she ran out, quit, and moved back to Charlottesville. The other coworker was nodding her head in confirmation. I said, "What are you talking about?" I then realized I hadn't seen this new employee in a few days. Serena was working late, and someone ran up the aisle, abruptly stopping behind her. She said no one was there. Serena had a cubicle one row over, not on the main hallway. Someone would have to come up my hallway and around and into that much shorter aisle. I don't think my buddy Greg would have done that to a young lady new to the office. Honestly, I don't remember anything after that. I'm not even sure I asked Greg if he was the one running down the hall, because the girl literally said there was no one there. I actually saw Serena the following spring. My fiance and I went up north to the National Aquarium in Baltimore, and we were in line when I spotted her in another line maybe 100 feet away. Not wanting to freak her out or leave the line, I decided not to approach her about the incident. The poor girl had left town to move back home after her experience. I just realized, though, it would ensure her that she wasn't crazy and had someone to validate what happened to her, because I bet few actually believed her or knew what to make of her story. This was 20 years ago. I would brush off what happened to me, rationalize it away if it hadn't happened to someone else. I continued to work there until recently, and nothing else quite that extreme ever took place again. Sometimes when I think back, I wish I had turned around more quickly, and I'm not exactly sure how I didn't. It was as loud as you'd expect. Heavy footsteps pounding down the hallway in a full-out sprint. I could hear every step. However, had I been watching and heard the abrupt stop in front of me, I'm fairly certain I too might have been really freaked out. Greg had left for Chicago and was fortunate enough to be accepted in the Second City comedy team. His mom actually still works there, and in 2018 I asked her to ask him about it, but I soon left to pursue another position and never got an answer. Thank you for sending that in, Scott. That's pretty creepy, hoss. This next account was sent to me by Miss Becky Johnson, and it is a good one. Was it a ghost or a Bigfoot? You be the judge. After my mom married my stepfather, we moved from California to my stepfather's home in Louisiana, Tangipahoa Parish to be exact. A few years later, my mom and stepdad met this elderly woman who we all came to love dearly, and we called her Aunt Amy. Aunt Amy lived way out in the woods, a couple of towns away from us. I was 7 years old at the time. My two older brothers were 12 and 10. We loved going to Aunt Amy's house to spend the weekend because we got to play with several neighborhood kids that lived down the dirt road close to her house. Sad to say, Aunt Amy had 2 children, twins, a boy and a girl, that passed away when they were 5 from yellow fever. It was many years before we met her. The children's passing was too hard for her husband to accept, and he ended his own life in the very same house where Aunt Amy still lived. Aunt Amy had no indoor bathroom. She had an outhouse in the backyard about 200 feet away from her house that we had to use if the urge to go should arise. One particular summer weekend, my mom and stepdad allowed us to spend the weekend with Aunt Amy, not knowing at the time this would be the last weekend I would ever want to stay with her. The first night we were there, I woke up thirsty. It was really late, and I needed to go pee really bad. I went to the kitchen to get a drink of water before going outside to relieve myself. As I raised my glass, I saw a huge, hairy man's face staring back at me through the window. I dropped the glass and shattered it. Then I dropped to my knees. Scared out of my wits, I crawled back to the living room where my 2 brothers and I slept when we stayed there. I threw the covers over my head. I was shaking under the blankets, knowing there was no way I was going outside to use the bathroom. Needless to say, I ended up wetting myself right then and there. I was so sure the face in the window was the ghost of Aunt Amy's husband. It couldn't be a live man. The window was almost 10 or more feet off the ground. I laid there, shaking under my pee-soaked blankets, barely able to breathe. Finally, I passed out from loss of air. That or I just fell asleep. But the next morning came, and I begged Aunt Amy repeatedly to call my mom and stepdad to come and get me. I never told her why, just that I needed to go home. She made the call, and an hour later they came to pick up me and my brothers. On the way home, I told them what happened, and I begged them to never make me stay there again. Thankfully, they never did. Now, many years later, thinking back on that scary night, and hearing others talk about their Bigfoot encounters and how Bigfoot likes to peek in the windows of people's houses, now I'm not so sure it was the ghost of Aunt Amy's husband looking at me through that window all those years ago, or a Bigfoot. I'm leaning more toward it being a Bigfoot. It did have a bigger than normal hairy face, and remembering that window was at least 10 or more feet off the ground. What do you think? Miss Becky, I think it's a Bigfoot, but I wasn't there. I have heard spirits do stay close to the places they're familiar with in life. Nonetheless, a great story, and I thank you for sending it in. If you'd like your story told here on the Shutter, you can find the email in the description. Send me your story, I'll tell it. And just to let everybody know, there are 10 other videos ahead of this one, so you can go back and check. There's some really strange accounts in there that I think you guys will enjoy. Okay, if you liked it, hit that thumbs up and give it a share. I truly appreciate all your support. You guys are just awesome. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you back here next time for The Shutter.